The STI is dead. In today's video, we're going to talk not only about why the STI is not coming back, we don't expect an STI to be released, at least in the next 5 or 6 years, and we're going to talk about why the plummeting WRX sales leads us to believe this, and just generally everything we know from Subaru at this point. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, but for those of you guys holding out for a new STI or hoping for something crazy, we're not going to see it underneath the STI brand. Will STI still be a thing? Will it still be a subset of the company that creates versions for stuff like the WRX and the BRZ and maybe in the future the Forester and other cars like that? Yes, probably, but are we going to see a WRX STI or just an STI? It's not looking good. Let's hop in the WRX, take a drive, and talk about it. This is somewhat disappointing news, and welcome back. Thank you guys for joining me on this sunny day. Although this is not as urgent of a film as it probably is, I'm urgently filming this because the sales data just came out on the VB WRX for the most recent month, and it's part of what we're going to talk about. But generally, I would say this is some pretty disappointing news in the grand scheme of all things news. Subaru. We don't have, obviously, nobody can ever have concrete information, but that should not scare you away from the fact that we pretty much know at this point. So for a long time, we've been expecting a new generation STI to come out, and for the last, I'd say about 18 to 24 months, we've been pretty sure it was coming as either a hybrid or full electric STI. Now we've gotten some hints from Subaru over this period of time that is actually going to be what is coming. However, things have started to shift and kind of key events have kind of gone past by. What does that really mean? We've had more and more hints to STI versions or souped up versions of the VB WRX. Now, a lot of you guys are gonna say, well, that's just exciting. We're gonna get better VB WRXs. But the reality is that likely that means we're gonna see kind of the doubling down of the fact that the STI has become a version. And that forever has been somewhat true. The STI has always been the WRX STI. And as the STI has been phased out and has been in the process of being phased out, we've seen the STI version of the BRZ and technically the STI version of the VB WRX. And the STI modifications, or the parts that are under the STI wing, like the exhaust and the lip and the duckbills and all that stuff, are still readily available, and you know, we're kind of doubling down. So that's number one, where we're kind of seeing where we've seen evidence there. We've also missed some key auto shows, and the biggest upcoming auto show that Subaru will be attending, where you're going to see, from my understanding directly from Subaru, a high-performance rendition of the VB WRX, which, if that's what they're selling as the hopes and dreams, not exactly promising. And then on top of that, we've now passed the time that traditionally we would hear about the next generation car. So historically, Subaru kind of goes in a 6, 7, 8 year cycle with new generations of cars. And at around year 4 or year 5, we hear the release of the next generation. We basically get concrete information that it's going to be coming. That has gone and passed. We are now at the date that we would have expected already to hear that. Going one step further, because I think that's why most of you guys watch me, is I can weigh in on things outside of what normal press can weigh into. So far, the little that we've talked about is literally the only information anyone has. Anyone. Nobody has more information other than Subaru. So one, those claiming that there's more substantial information, wrong. Two, and this is where, yes, I get to weigh in and provide a little information, is let's take a look at the engineering and the business aspect of the manufacturing, because that weighs into a lot of decision making, and we can talk about what the best case scenario is and what most likely Subaru will do, because Subaru lives on a kind of a Kaizen or Lean or Six Sigma view on manufacturing, which does bleed into the kind of business operational use case. So what am I talking about there? For a long time, we've seen increasing sales numbers across the fleet of all Subarus. This has meant that they've had additional money to bolster their fleet and work on new things, right? Cash flow is king and develop. It also helps projections and allows them to increase their risk tolerance in bringing risky business use cases to the market, which is a good thing when you think about a new STI or something like that. But unfortunately, Subaru has been on a steady decline in sales. I think as of this morning, sales are down something like, depending on the region that you're looking at, sales are down between 11 and 17%. That isn't terrible when you think about the entirety of the state of the automotive market, especially in the United States, but it's not good when you think about Subaru's positioning in the market, because Subaru doesn't sell the, let's say, affordable car, nor do they sell the expensive car, which would traditionally mean their margins, their internal margins, are probably tighter than a lot of other manufacturers, because they don't have vehicles that are basically bringing down their economies of scale, and they don't have vehicles that are paying down the economies of scale. On top of that, one larger blow, and what made this video a sunny video on my drive home, because it's somewhat urgent and it'll be going out tomorrow or 2 days from today for you guys, is the fact that the WRX sales numbers were reported. And those have been steadily declining, but we've now seen probably the most damning report, which is about a 70% decrease in sales. I think this past month, I wanna say, don't quote me, but it's something like 483 VB WRXs were sold, and that's down from 1,100. And guys, that's bad. That is some of the lowest numbers that Subaru has posted. Now, technically, there have been a few lower numbers that they've posted, but that is simply a product of the release of the VB WRX, meaning they didn't have the units to supply. Since the VB WRX has been put out, this is by far, without extenuating circumstance, the lowest. This is significantly lower than when we had a chip shortage. Now that means two things here, which is really important. One, that means lower cash flow, which is gonna hurt their projections, which is gonna lower their risk tolerance. And this is basic economics following what typical Kaizen following organizations do. And two, it's gonna cause kind of a negative equity inventory situation. Now, what does that really mean? It's creating almost like a backlog in the amount of inventory, meaning there's a buildup in inventory in the States, which creates a couple things. At the very surface level, it means that Subaru will likely have to create incentives to sell off that inventory to not hurt their supply chain, because the supply chain kind of not only progressively moves, but it can't just slow down. It slows down, you can slow it down, but it takes months for that slowdown to actually slow down inventory delivered. The bigger thing that it actually does is actually the latter of that situation. It affects the way that supply chain planning goes, and that affects their economies of scale. And if you know anything about manufacturing, changing your quantity vastly changes the profitability of doing something. So why is this all important? This is all important because we're nearing a key historical time where we've seen output, and this isn't just once, this isn't twice, this is through almost the history of Subaru releasing new generations of vehicles. You know, we can model this like based on their entire observable history, and we're lining that up with one of the worst financial times that only give evidence to things getting worse, which means that every bell, alarm, and whistle is telling Subaru that things are not going well. Now you can take this one step further and look at what typical manufacturing, engineering, and business, and like business engineering, when those two things are melded together, practices are with Subaru, and just based on historically and geographically what they're gonna follow in terms of acceptable practice. Yes, companies take risks, but if we're just looking at the norms of what regular risk tolerances are, everything kind of falls outside of what an organization is likely gonna do in this case. Now, certainly that mold has been broken many a times, but if you just look at the volume of decision making, the whole purpose of what lean methodologies are, the idea of Kaizen, the idea of Six Sigma and what 5S is, all of these continuous improvement, type of methodologies and ideologies lean towards homogeneous business decision making. And when you strive for uniformity in what you're looking for business outcome, it just means that we're fighting a tide. So ultimately, while nobody can know exactly what's happening, I guess I'm hedging my bet, and it's a well-educated bet, that the idea of a new generation just STI is probably something of the past or of the very far future. And more likely than anything, we should be looking forward to what the next generation WRX and the versions of our current WRX that might be performance versions might hold to offer. And I think with every one of these videos, as I've already talked about, I get two responses and I'm going to answer them up front and in the video. The first response is, how do you know you don't work for Subaru? You're completely right. All I can say is I know as just as much about every other person reporting on this, and I'm implementing many years of engineering and business consulting, not only in this industry, but other industries, and applying that to the situation. Two, a lot of you guys are gonna say, no, something else has happened, and I'm gonna address that now. It is July 23rd, which is a Wednesday. By the time you're seeing this, it's July 25th. I'm not gonna post it if something's changed. So as of July 25th, 2025, you know absolutely nothing more than what I've just said. So there's no hidden news out there or anything like that. So I've now mentioned both those things in the video. Just wanna say that because those are the most common comments. But with that said, likely you guys are watching this a couple days, a couple weeks, a couple months after I post it. So please let us all know in the comment section if anything's changed. And one step further, I think there's a changing of the tides in terms of whether or not people want to see a new STI and whether people want to see a WRX that just has more power and a better transmission. What do you think? I want to know. Let us know in the comment section below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.